Right, so it's being recorded now.
Okay.
Right, the last session this morning, or this afternoon now it is Nicola Graves Gregory talking about the Pythagorean mathematics of the Maheśvara and Vedic measure. Is that right?
No.
No, Nicola will give you the proper pronunciation of the title in a minute.
moment.
Right, so over to you, Nicola.
Okay, so if I hold these here, so that people can see, so I hold it up like that. If I'm like that distant, then it comes. Is that coming up on the screen?
Yeah, it shows up well on the screen. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I should stand here and hold it forward. Do that?
Well, this is just, I think I'm going to, thank you. Hang around.
Okay, yeah, just in case you need extra.
You're a
set of
wonderful
hands.
support. I love it. So, okay, so yes, so the title is 21st Century Pythagorean Mathematics, Vedic Measure, and the Maheśvara. And I think I've got much too much to put into 30 minutes. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. So I'll probably take a leaf out of Lou's book and might change totally. But I've got some things that I would like to. So first of all, so that is, there we go. To converse, yeah. So that's right. Different languages offer and or prescribe differing ways of being in worlds. And this is, so we have the words open and or close worlds. And we know this, we see this, you know, we can invoke through words. This is magic and miracles. We can evoke. This is poetry and theatre. And we can categorize and classify and give things quantitative number, and we can pin things in and pin things down. These relate to something I've spoken of before, the views of Martin Buber of the world of I, it, and the world of I, thou. So the world of I, it is our third dimensional thing, and to the it's our third person approach by which we just see. It's the way that we walk along the road and see barcodes, and people, you know, you listen to, stay in you know, your own little world and actually don't see and feel what's happening actually in the present around. And the I, thou is the world that goes into awareness and is open. And this also is, obviously, this is not a total openness because it depends on our preconceptions, our what work, how we are oriented, right? But it's that being willing to be open to phenomena where we are present. So those are two poles, and we need both of them. We need both of them. Modern, it's so tricky. modern nation states, I put this here, favor subject, predicate, and other forms which funnel into I, it. Sanskrit, Hopi, and other ancient languages offer other textures. And I've chosen this term textures because I read an interesting review, a short review by David Lorimer in the Paradigm Explorer. No, it's not it's Paradigm Explorer, which is the Scientific and Medical Network quarterly. And it was a review of a book called Cheerfulness, which is so wonderful. It is a history of poetry and philosophy concerned with cheerfulness. And the person who wrote the book, I can't remember, but I'm sure you'll find it, I don't think it's in the title, talked about the texture of community, that cheerfulness is important for the texture of community. And this is very beautiful. Texture is to do with touch. And I think we've all experienced how Zoom can be very helpful, but we don't hug, we don't touch through Zoom. We know the stories of the Romanian orphanages. We know of, old people who are just lonely for touch. Well, others as well. So texture, the texture of community, how we touch, contact is touch, which then goes to tact and not over touching this. And of course, it's so lovely as well in terms of languages, it's texture, it's the text. So there's a huge happening within that. Okay, so anyway, here we go. So just talking about community, I'm going to go quite quickly now because probably more than half of you know, I've been through this sort of thing before. The 6th century BC community of Pythagoras and Theano was important, obviously, mathematically. And what's come to me is that one very big difference, there are obviously a lot of differences, but one big difference I hadn't noticed before about Pythagoras from the other pre-Socratics is that he and Theano were part of a community. The other pre-Socratics were all, well, they were actually all shamans as well, that's not usually talked about, but they were all teachers. But what was important for Pythagoras and Theano was the community. It was a community, this is not very well written, but you all know this one. It was founded on ta mathemata, those things which have been learned, and they've been learned according to Pythagorean philosophy, philosophia, and that is the wisdom of love, not the love of wisdom. And it is also, yeah, it's the wisdom of loving friendship. Philia is loving friendship. So I've written and spoken about that, so I'm not going to say more about that. And I've also, these are all quite quick because I really want to get to the Maheśvara and also for you to experience a bit of the Maheśvara. So this is because it was to do with measure. So I'm just pointing out that in, again, 6th century BC, Pythagorean mathematics, number was arithmos, and that was discrete number, whole numbers, the positive integers as we speak of them now, positive wholenesses. Right? There was also logistike. So then from there you had arithmetike, and that was concerned with the qualities of numbers. And this is different, 2, 3, 5, 7, they all have different qualities just within mathematics. Obviously, with Peter's work, we know a lot about 5 and its significance. Anyway, so there are qualities of numbers, but these were related to qualities of life as well. And then logistike concerned calculation, right? Now, and geometria was different in that the subject matter was space and was not necessarily number. It was continuous. So that was very different, but it was space, lines, points, planes, etc., etc. Logistike, in a way, was a bridge because it dealt with ratios as well. So there was a bridge, and this is relevant in terms of this word logos, which is, I went through in the last presentation, and I've written it up. It's in there, more about logos, and there's a lot more to go into. But it has a meaning of rate, has a mathematical meaning of ratio or proportion. It also means reason, and of course, its fundamental meaning is word, the word, and so it's involved in communication and relationship. So logistike is in that. So that's, and this is measure. So we're looking at measure here. Now, present day quantitative measure, the default measure that we think of is linear measure. And this is actually visual measure. Now, I actually started thinking about this coming over. I was thinking it's visual, but it is actually also imaginary. Just ordinary length is imaginary. It started with, we can measure, you have a ruler and measure and go from there to there. Yeah. But when I measure from there to there, or to the moon, etc., I am actually extrapolating already. And of course, we have lots of evidence that this extrapolation works. But it's very interesting that anyway, so it was for me, but I want to think more about it. But it's visual measure of the material, tactile world, and it comes from geometria, measure of Gaia, earth, land. The thing about it, in that, if you think of geometria, that measure, the intent, or a partial intent, was to control that. I'm going to measure that land. That's my land, it's so big, that's your land, that's so big, whatever, etc., etc. Of course, there's mathematics that came out of that, and the perfect solids, which is more concerned with beauty and Platonic ideals, etc. Okay, now, so different measure. So Pythagorean mathematics includes music. This is something that's not usually thought of very much. But it was Pythagoras who introduced the octave into European world. It's apocryphal. That he discovered it, I think. Musical measure comes through hearing, not through seeing, and it evokes feeling. Whereas there is beauty in there's visual beauty as well, but in fact, the visual cortex is much larger. The part of the brain concerned with vision, a very large part of it, is from the reptilian brain, and it's to do with control. It's to do with, can I eat that, or will it eat me? So that is inherent in vision. To the extent, I wrote another paper, The Beauty of Mathematics and the Mathematics of Beauty, and I quote, there's a neuroscientist, Professor Zecchi, who did some very interesting experiments, and from that, I came to the conclusion that the point is not to say what is or what is not beautiful, but the point is that in order to develop our humanity, we need to develop our sense for beauty. We need to look for beauty. Where we see ugliness, we start raking up the aggressive parts of the brain. When we look for beauty, we are developing our humanity. Oh, that's right. So yeah. So musical measure the intent is to create beauty and or invoke feeling, depending kind of music, but it's through listening, and it's listening to one's own instrument and to the others with whom one plays, which is also feeds into this idea of conversation and how can we converse with each other in a way to find points of contact, points of where we can love each other, actually, really. And of course, this is to do with questions as well. It's to do with being interested in the other, not just in, which is why I really wanted to do this kind of quickly. So yes, so the visual quantitative measure is in the conscious world of I, it, whereas musical qualitative measure lives in the world of awareness of I, thou, and in the bridge between awareness and consciousness. And so then this is a recap for people, those who don't know. So I've developed a 21st century Pythagorean epistemology. The difference, the thing is that the Pythagorean maths of the 6th century BC was based in stasis. The ideas, I mean, that was a time of coming into consciousness that was key. That's what the pre-Socratic thinkers were about. There was this, it's to do with this separation from nature. Mike Horner talked about this in his talk yesterday about the human language, both speech and writing, having separated us from nature, but that this obviously is something that we now, the paradox of humanity, of how it's our privilege and our cross. And of course the cross is an amazing symbol, which I won't go into now. But yes, so the reason, so the thing is, so that the Pythagorean mathematics then was concerned with ideals and eternals really, yeah. Whereas now they had an integral calculus. The huge, obviously what I've written before about what happened in the Renaissance and Enlightenment and the huge mathematical, basically what happened because of zero coming in and what this meant for our number system. And then we had differential calculus. So we had a way of dealing with quantitative change. And from that, we had a couple of more than 2 centuries of, wow, look what we can do, industrial revolution, capitalism, hey, this is great, and then the end of the 19th century, going to the 20th century, which is of course really interestingly called the fin de siècle, which is like amazing. No other century is called the fin de siècle, because the end of the 19th century going to the 20th century saw such huge cultural changes in all areas, in science and art, blah, blah, blah. And so then we come into the 20th century, and it is this beginning of more reflection and questioning about this direction. And so in mathematics, one saw, well, obviously there were mathematical problems that arose at the end of the 19th century, going into the 20th century, non-Euclidean mathematics and geometries and etc. And then going into projective geometry, topology, and then also, from differential calculus, going into change process, going into systems theory. This is a whole different way of culture and of course mathematics. And so so now the way, so this is awareness, so taking awareness as primary, which relates to this wholeness that we're all in, right? We can come into consciousness, which is more limited. We can come into language. We can come into reason, and we can come into logic. But Pythagorean mathematics now is really concerned with these areas between awareness, consciousness, and language. Mathematics is a language. It's pre-reason. Certainly pre-logic. Yeah. Right, okay, super. So that means I can get on to the Maheśvara. So here we go. Yeah, so the Maheśvara is the Vedic mantra. I mean, you can pass this around because I do realize it's kind of small. I did mean to do it all on the bigger size, but I ran out of time. So the Maheśvara is the Vedic mantra of creation from spirit into flesh, matter. And it's composed of 14 sutras. And to the extent that one can actually pronounce it correctly, it does what it says on the tin. So, I mean, is that a good idea to pass it round? I don't know. Yes, John's saying it back. Let's have a look. Yeah, so John would like to see it at the back. I don't know if anybody else wants to see it in between. Anyway, so look, what I'll do, I'll just show you, because I only just did this so that you can see, and then I'll come back to it. So I'll just show you anywhere. Let's show these people here. Yeah. So this is the Maheśvara Sutra. So that's in Sanskrit. That's the Sanskrit, and this is the transliteration into English lettering. And I think I should say it. I will. But again, this could be passed back to who anybody wants to see it. Do you want to? Was it Lou?
No.
Not now. Okay. Is it? No.
Pass it further.
There you
back,
go.
yes.
So yeah, so you start with Om, A E Om, R, E Om, I Out, Hayawara, Lang, Nyamanganam, Chapang, Gahtata, Jabagadata, Kapachatata, Chatata, Kapai, Shak, Sa, How, Iti Taksat, Paramatmananama. So yes, so it's a meaningful arrangement of the Sanskrit alphabet. So, which is, we don't have anything like that in English. So yes, the phonemes are divinities. They're spiritual beings. We experience them acting through us psychophysiologically. And that's, again, I'll whiz through and then get you to sound some, or invite you to sound some. And then, so we've passed the symbols back. The Devanagari, the symbols, are the cloaks of divinities. They are meaningful symbols. Oh, that's it. So I didn't send that back, so I want to send this back. Now then, so to get on to the measure part, right? So we saw so that we have linear measure, which is essentially visual measure, although it has this relationship with the material tactile world as well, which is important. We have hearing measure in musical measure. And this is not related. I mean, well, again, it has this bridge between awareness and consciousness, because you can have a metronome, and just like the headsets that cut people off, we also see that in kind of, I forgot what it's called, kind of that music that people dance to, that's just got that rhythm. Techno, yeah. So it's kind of like, whereas, I mean, classical music, including modern classical music, or blues, or world music, it's not techno. It is, and so it doesn't have that. It has kind of, and it's all happening. Music's happening. Now, within Sanskrit, within the Vedas, we go further, not just measure of visual and hearing measure. There are measures of the 5 senses, right? And these relate to the 5, and they don't call them elements, they call them the great life beings, the Mahabhuta. So the world is composed of Mahabhuta. We are composed of Mahabhuta. There we go. That's it, yeah. Now, and that comes out of, so Aeon is at the, R is the most open, right? So R is that awareness of the open of the spirit. One is invoking Brahman when one starts there. Aeon is at that level. Aeon, I ouch. I ouch, one comes to the cross. And then Hayawara is at the level of the thymus. When we're born, the thymus is the largest organ. It's larger than the heart when we're born. What happens is that all the other organs get bigger. The thymus doesn't get bigger, right? So at the level of the thymus, what corresponds is the Mahabhuta, which is Hayawarak. And this is, it's Hayawarak lung, going into the lungs. And these are space, air, water, fire or light, and earth. And they have measures that correspond to them, which are called tanmatra. And so these are the different ways that we perceive these different elements. So the tanmatra, which literally means measure of that, are these, which is the next line. So so it goes Hayawarak, lung, Nyamangananam. Now those, well, actually I put it better here, I think. Oh, there you go. You keep getting bundles at the back, John. So here we have the different elements. So Nya is the tanmatra, which is Nya is Shabda, is sound, which is the tanmatra of space. Now this you might appreciate by if you close if we just listen with our eyes closed and don't fall asleep, we can just listen and we're aware of sounds. Here we can hear the traffic, we might hear wind, but we hear space, in fact. And then we have sparsha, is touch, and that's the measure of air. which is really interesting because we live in air and we don't think about it. But if we do, that is how that our edges are always in contact with air. That is, the Tanmatra have 3 levels. They have the physical, the subtle, and the causal, which we certainly aren't going to go into now. So I just want to tell you these. And I mean, that just sound they are strange. They are very strange to us. So there's Rupa, which is form or name, and that corresponds to fire and light. Again, you can get a feel of that. It's when the sun comes, when there's light, we can see form, and name and form have that kind of consciousness sense about them. Anyway. Then rasa is taste or essence or love, and that corresponds to water. And again, we can't taste without water. When our mouths are dry, we can't taste. And water, without water, there is no growth. And as long as seeds are dry, they will last for a very, very long time. As soon as there's water, then they can grow. Water is so connected with love. And then the other one, gandha, is odor or smell, and that's the connection with earth. Now,
And there are 5 elements,
yeah, so the 5,
like the 5 platonic solids.
well, that is I mean, obviously, I don't know, yeah, so generally speaking, the tetrahedron is to do with the fire, and then the cube with the earth, and the octahedron with air, and the icosahedron with water. And it's a pity Dennis isn't here. And then the dodecahedron with space, the container. That's sort of, yeah. Now, so the other picture that I want to show you of the Maheśvara is here, there. Now, what I've done there is to show them, so there are 5 columns here, which are guttural, palatal, cerebral, dental, and labial. So those are the different places that one sounds. So very smooth. So for you also, so guttural, so I've just done it there. So it's the back of the throat. So it's like cough, cough, right? And then palatal is with the tongue, well, yeah, it's the tongue lifted up to the soft palate. So that's like that sound. Nyah, nyah. Cerebral is with the tongue pointing to the roof of the mouth. So we don't do, I mean, in Scottish you do the, you've got a cerebral there, right? But mostly in English there's a distinct lack of cerebral in lots of language. Yes, and it is interesting because in craniosacral terms, the cerebral is very important because it's at between, it's at the edge of the soft palate, and it actually does bring about an oscillation in the cerebrospinal fluid, which is very important anyway. And then there's dental, obviously. ta when the teeth are involved, and labial when it's the lips. Now, so those, each sutra has different elements of guttural, palatal, cerebral, dental, and labial, and it's very, very interesting. It's and very meaningful, and more than I could possibly go and do now. So, but what I want to come back to is that Pythagorean mathematics and the Vedas are both and ways of understanding reality, both externally, materially oriented, and internally, spiritually oriented, and knowing that they are actually one, that these are not separate, but they're not separate and they are distinct. They're one in love. And also understanding that either or rules in the macro-material linear time world of I-It within the one. So Pythagorean mathematics and the Vedas are very closely related in their way of seeing the world, appreciating the world. I did write this. That's not so good. That one. That one. Okay. And they also, both understand that all knowledge is human knowledge, that knowledge or knowing can go in two different directions. Whenever I say something, I think probably more, but anyway, they can go towards information and or they can go towards wisdom. And so I'll quote T.S. Eliot for you, or other people know because I've quoted it before, but it's just really nice. It's what knowledge have we lost through information, and what wisdom have we lost through knowledge, through gaining knowledge. So it's a very nice quote. Anyway, so then yeah. So that's that. So the fact that it's human knowledge, and then so thinking of the Vedas, so then there's a very big question for 21st century Pythagorean mathematics, given that there are more than 5 physical senses, that there are at least, there are the major 5 physical senses as part of incarnation. How can we relate? How do they work together in wholes within wholes? And how do we learn about this? How do we, what can this mean in terms of our living as whole beings, not just the separations that we have? And something I didn't put in, but so what I'm going to finish on this, but then I would like, if there is time, Nick, maybe I'll finish. We'll see if there's time for some sounding, and then we'll, whatever it is, hey. So the main thing that I wanted to say is that gesture is key. So this is to do with our orientation, but gesture is even more nuanced. So there's an orientation towards wisdom or to information, but in fact gesture is more nuanced than that. It concerns all these different senses. I did write something there, but I've lost it, which is that not only, so that in the Maheśvara, you go from the Mahabhuta, the great life beings, and then you go to the Tanmatra, the measures of them. You then go to five, and these are all in fives. You then go to the senses of self-expression, and you then go to the senses of self-recognition. And the self, of course, in the Vedas is the great self, but the great self acting through, and the great self acting through the little self. So their idea, so that I'm saying the sense that they can be called the senses or the organs of self-expression and self-recognition. So this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that different languages proscribe and or offer different ways of being in the world. And Sanskrit and the Vedas offer a different way of being in the world from that which we've grown up and mostly live in. And within Sanskrit, this gesture is nuanced. And thank you all. Thank you all. Okay. And we didn't do any sounding. They all should be. Go on then. Oh, Sydney was first on.
I was gonna ask, so when historically, when did numbers lose their qualities? Was there like a historical silent revolution when the concept of zero came in and they lost their qualities of like friendship, being friendly numbers, or their geometrical properties? When did this happen?
Well, I think that basically
From the Pythagorean worldview.
yeah, so there was already a rift between Pythagoras and Plato, and we see that in the way that, because both mathematics and philosophy are Pythagorean terms. This is kind of standard knowledge, right? And it's very well, obviously I've written about it, and so there's, it's very, very clear that the original meaning of philosophia is the wisdom of love. And by the time of Plato, it becomes the love of wisdom. Now, this is such a turnaround.
It's a love of information then, right?
Well, no, I think Plato still did love wisdom, but he'd lost, he dissed women, he'd lost it, he said.
Your phone.
But, so there was a big, something happened then. And then there's the question, so in terms of the qualities of numbers. Shall I stay with you, or should we go to Lou and come back?
I'll call him back.
You'll call him back, okay. So so in terms of the depth of understanding of possibilities of qualities of numbers, I think, or the reality of it, something died already when the Pythagorasiano community was broken. Because you see, again, I talked about last year, and it's certainly in the paper, I mean, all the pre-Socratics were shamans, and incubation was one of the ways that they went into awareness in order to bring back what needed to come into consciousness at that time. And part of that was to do with the qualities of numbers both in terms of, the solids, the mathematics, what we think of as mathematics, but also related to, that four relating to justice and things that now we don't know. And so from that.
I even know there's a lost knowledge or a lost tradition. I get that sense. I don't know if it's right.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, because mathematics was rooted in spiritual development and in community. That's the mathematics that we have came out of community, right? Now, and what's really lovely, actually, when you get sort of mathematicians together, there is community, right? People who, Lou knows, because I started that book, Maths with Heart, interviewing various mathematicians, because mathematicians have to do lots of things that they don't really want to do. I mean, and some lucky ones are able to get into some, find somewhere where they can actually follow something that they really, really love. And so it's still there, but it's but in most of the world, it's been used. I mean, I've been, because I've written quite a lot about this. So about the fact it was an esoteric community. Esoteric means inner in Greek. The reason we have the meaning of spiritual or mystical of esoteric was because that was the nature of the Pythagorean community. It was a spiritual community. It was a community that worked on the basis of the wisdom of love. Thanks, Lou.
Did you have a question, Lou?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to explore your
No,
statement
you're next,
about
Fred. You're next.
gesture as key.
Mm.
Originally, in the Pythagorean frame, there is no distinction between number and the gesture by which number may be evoked.
Mm.
But if we go all the way up to the axiomatic point of view, and say read Wittgenstein after Principia, then you find Wittgenstein saying things like, whereof we cannot speak, we must remain silent. The proposition shows itself. So that he is seeing an incompleteness which is filled in by the gesture. The gesture of the proposition continues itself beyond its logical content. And he is evoking that in an attempt to go back to that Pythagorean unity after a certain kind of split has been articulated in the form of the axiomatics and formalism, which would attempt to be independent of the gesture. And that was written before Gödel, who came along and showed that, in fact, all of those systems contained a self-referential gesture, which would impugn their incompleteness in another way. So that we live in this world where we think that many people speak as though gesture is independent of language, but gesture is not independent of language. Gesture is the essence of language in all cases, whether it's mathematical or ordinary language.
Yeah.
So I wasn't exactly asking a question, but
No, that's beautiful. Yeah.
I wanted to say,
Yeah.
feeling about your statement about gesture.
Right. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Yeah. No, I see that very much. Yeah. That is absolutely, and it goes together with. I mean, because Wittgenstein, was a deeply integral person, and so all of his philosophy was, he lived his philosophy. And I remember reading a short biography of one of his students, and I think must have been sort of the outbreak of the Second World War, and I think it was Norman Malcolm saying to him, "Oh, well, this doesn't concern us, we're philosophers." I'm like, what? Philosophy, we are deeply involved, and that's it. And so I think, I mean, so that, yes, as you say, the gesture continues on. This, I think, is really, really important. And this actually is interesting in terms of the work that you're putting forward, you and Angel, with moving from one to the other. That is, the language is a gesture. And I'm aware that.
Yes, we've got one. Should we go to the final formal question from Fred, please?
Okay, thanks very much, Nicola. Wonderful talk. I wanted to draw on an illustration, I think, that serves to illustrate the difference between the abstract linear visual-based measure, the abstraction that has been developed over the course of time, into the abstract meter and the abstract second. In the instructions given for building the altar for fire sacrifice in the Rig Veda, they perform some very precise geometrical constructions, but they do so with a singularly different approach to measure, which is if a length is to be 30 units, they prescribe as a unit, not an abstraction, but a seed, so that the priest has to go out and get 30 seeds, 30 individual seeds.
Mm.
And it illustrates the incarnate nature of measurement, which is nonetheless used as a support for this cosmogenic geometrical activity. So I thought it might back up your point that something of the quality and touch based and embedding of measure in the incarnate world can be learned from these quarters. I share your suspicion.
Yeah. Oh, very beautiful. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. Well, yes, thank you.
Yes, so
all.
thanks very much, Nicola, for your talk.
Thank you, Gregory.
And if you've got more material, you can discuss it, of course, with who you.
Yes. Okay. I'll just gather up all
Amber is always active.
everything I've scattered around here.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll stop the recording.
Yeah.